Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Hey everybody, welcome. Today is Wednesday, June 15th. We are glad to have you with us. Megan, hi, how are you?
Hi, doing well. Enjoying the fact that somehow California is not the hottest place in the country at the moment. So my sympathies to everybody who's dealing with this heat wave. I hope people are staying cool and safe out there. Goodness.
Yeah, this is when, if you're in Texas, aren't you glad you're in a home study course and not going out somewhere, trying to stay cool? This is an interesting period of time in the bar review and in the bar season. We've got all the results in from February. We're planning on the July exam. We're about 40 some days out until that exam. So we haven't hit that final big push of 30 days, but it's still a time when people are really beginning to lock in and get serious about their studies. And we've certainly seen that happen with Megan.
Yeah, definitely. I've had a lot of questions this week about how much am I studying too little, or am I on track, or where should I be right now? People starting to talk about where they would like ideally to hit the review stage, which I think this is a good time to be thinking about that. Don't hold yourself to a specific date necessarily, but to be thinking and having that on your horizon of where ideally do I think is realistic for me to hit the end of my substantive studies, and is that going to be enough time to give me a good review period as well. Jackson, any thoughts on where people should try to be done with the substantive studies ideally?
Yeah, I'd like people to set a benchmark of around July 10th to be done with their substantive studies. Now, you may come in a few days ahead of that, you may come in a week even, or 10 days later, but the point is that that 10th of July gives you enough time to do the full review that's built into the study as it exists. If you get there after July 10th, that's not a crisis. It just means you're going to do a more focused study. Instead of trying to cover everything, you'll be really just narrowing down based on, we've got students that are really just now gearing into full-time study. A lot of people that take off work or something has changed in their world and now they're just starting that full study. And given that, I think that this is not a time to panic. It's just a time to put your head down and do the work. One of the things that's always surprising, I think, to students is how far away the exam is, even at 40 days, right? It seems like it's right now, but it is not. It's a very long way away. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. But I know there's something psychological about hitting June, but hopefully people feel like, I know I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I found for most people, not gonna be true for everybody, but for most people, June 1st and June 15th don't necessarily feel any closer to the bar. The 15th doesn't necessarily feel closer. It's something about hitting June that just feels, oh gosh, we're right there. We're right on top of it. But hopefully you've been able to settle now that we're a couple weeks into June and realize, okay, it's still June. We're still not in July. I still have the time that I need to do the work that needs to get done.
Yeah, so stay calm, everyone. And we will give you plenty of information. When we get to the 30-day point, I'll start doing daily emails if you're a July student, so make sure you're watching for that. We also know that there are some people that have fear of missing out and they're not going to take the July exam, but they're terrified to tell us that because they don't want to miss anything. Trust me, it's okay. Just let us know that you're sitting out this exam. We'll get you in the right list. The email series, though it is, I think, very valuable, is more valuable if you're actually seeing it as you get up to the exam. So in other words, seeing it now, if you're taking the February exam, really, I think you miss a whole lot of the impact of it. So don't worry, it'll be your turn soon enough. I also want to say that we still have a period of time now for maybe another week or so when we're going to talk to February 2023 and later students about their written work. But then we typically start to shut that down and just focus on July students for that 5-week period or so leading up to the exam. Is that the right timing for you, Megan? Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think for me this time around, it's looking like my schedule's been good. So I think I'll be able to stick with everybody through the end of this month. And then probably once we start July, I will transition to just the July students because I just want to make sure that I get everybody in who is taking the exam in a few weeks' time. And February, people have plenty of time to get their calls in and get moving. So if you're a February student and you have mentoring, make sure you start your calls now, because I think it's really helpful. I want to put you on the right track, and I know Jackson does too, so that then when we leave you for a few weeks, you are moving in the right direction and we can pick back up with you in August. Wow, that seems crazy to say.
And it may be that it's the end of June for me as well. I can't quite tell at this point. I will make an announcement when I cut off the February students in terms of coaching. As Megan said, it'll only be for a few weeks. And we'll do the same thing for Megan when she hits that point. It may be different dates for the two of us. It just depends on how our schedules tend to work out and the vagaries of how all of that goes. Plenty of time for everybody. And we just want to make sure everyone's got that opportunity. So I guess, is that a good segue to talking about? Go ahead. Why don't you take over?
Yeah. Yeah. So for the February students, I know we've talked about it. We're going to keep talking about it. We're doing live boot camp this year. Again, it's going to be in October in Florida, which is actually a really pleasant time of the year to be in Florida. It's really nice. And we would love to see anyone who is going to be taking the February bar or later and wants to get an amazing jumpstart to their studies, wants to learn more about photo reading, learn more about how to write their essays, learn more about how to get in the right mindset for the exam. So excited to be doing this with Jackson and with June. You might even meet Sarah as well. She pops in, but it's such a wonderful event, and we have really missed having it for the last couple of years with COVID. And so we really encourage you, if you are a February student, please consider coming down and taking the time to meet other bar review students, other people who have probably similar stories to your own as it comes to and relates to the bar exam, and then meeting with Jackson and June and myself in person and allowing us the opportunity to really work in an in-depth way with you that we cannot do over Zoom, in my opinion.
Well, and Megan didn't say this, but we're only taking 15 students into this boot camp. And in years past, we've done boot camp with 30 or 40 people. And it's been a great experience with that, but 15 people is really designed to be a different experience. It's designed to be very personal. We're going to do breakout sessions with June and Megan and myself with 5 students per each of us. So everyone will get the opportunity to rotate around and work with each of us individually, really, almost. And that's really a terrific opportunity. The other thing I will say, June and I were looking over the rosters of previous boot camps. Most of the people that came to boot camp passed the bar exam. And that's significant because most of our students, as you are, repeat bar takers. And when you've got a 20% national pass rate for that group, and we're getting well over 50%, well over of our boot camp participants who pass, it's significant. And this boot camp, I think, will be the best of all of them. We've learned a lot of lessons. We know a lot more about how to do this in a really effective way. It's 2 days, October 14th and 15th. It'll be here in Celebration. We'll take care of everything except your transportation and hotel. And I think it's going to be great. Now, the way that you take advantage of boot camp is that there is a link to pay a deposit. We've already had some deposits made for boot camp. So those 15 spots are going to fill, I think, relatively quickly. You pick your deposit amount, and then the total fee for boot camp right now is $2,000. Your balance will be due on September 10th. If you are unable or don't want to pay the balance or choose to not go to boot camp, you can cancel on that date and get a full refund of your deposit. So there's no risk to you at all. And then we'll just go to the next person on the waiting list. So a couple different options there, but make sure that you go ahead and get your seat secured. As I say, we do have people who have already registered for boot camp. So those seats, I think, will fill up relatively quickly, and we encourage you to attend. So boot camp. And by the way, if you saw the picture on the community group, great picture of June with Luke Skywalker, you'll have to come to boot camp to understand what that's about. So there you go.
Wonderful. All right, let's turn to a few student questions, Jackson, and then you're going to go into the second half of the MBE tips later, which should be wonderful and really helpful for students. First is a student who said, I'm worried because as I'm doing my essay review, I'm not having the law flow through and come to me as I type it out.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I wanted to dig into this a little bit. Let me start by talking about the writing structure and what informed the writing structure. When I first started teaching bar review, the normal way that people learned was memorization, and they recited rules, and there was some IRAC writing, and that was the gold standard, was IRAC. The problem for me was that I was starting to work with students that literally weren't able to memorize for whatever reason. and issue spotting just wasn't working. They couldn't memorize a rule and spit it out and then figure out how to apply it. And so I started doing some work based on the brain research work that we were doing with Harvard, with Project Zero and Howard Gardner. And we started saying, what if we invert that process and go from a different point of view? If we started at a factual level and then talked about what activates the brain to think about problem solving, instead of talking about what do I know that I've memorized and then work from there, you would have a different approach to the writing. And that started to inform my work about thinking about fact law application. Now, the fact law application system that Megan and I teach today is probably the fourth or fifth major iteration of that writing system that I created now 30 plus years ago. That's scary. But the basic concept remains that when you start with the facts and you make a factual argument, if you will ask yourself this very important question after you write the factual argument, what would the law have to say in order to support that argument? Let me say it again. What would the law have to say in order to support that argument? Now, if you ask yourself that question, what you're going to get, regardless of whether you're a photo reader or not, is that you will have a paraphrased rule of law. Then you make the other side's argument, ask yourself the same question, what would the law have to say to support this argument? And do the same thing, get a paraphrased rule of law. Now you're creating the boundaries or the goal lines, if you will, a hedge on the two places of law. And this is where the law really starts to come out. I think for this student's question, what they're really asking is, why don't I have any conscious memory that's going to come to me of, here's the black letter law? And that's why they're feeling stuck, instead of just letting their fingers stay on the keyboard, literally, and just keep typing, right? You've just typed the argument, you've typed the facts, now you've typed the factual argument, now just keep typing. What was the law have to say? So that's the premise behind how I think you get the law out. Megan, you want to add to that?
No, I think that's great. I think if you have questions or concerns about things like that too, that's part of what coaching is really helpful for, is because Jackson and I have different strategies to help you actually put that into practice. And that's something that for some people comes very easy, and for some people it takes some practice. And so I think it's a really helpful thing to practice in the context of a coaching call, where you can continue to refine how it's going and get feedback on it from a neutral party, which would be me or Jackson.
I also have to say, this is really fascinating to me. There are now a growing number of bar review mentors who teach FLA, and I hear about how they teach it from people that were in their courses or worked with them. And it's fascinating to me how they've taken the idea and actually messed it up, in my view, because they can't quite get rid of IRAC and they're still trying to work with memorization. I would say that you're in this course, you're fortunate. I created this, nobody else. I developed it. Megan and I helped refine it over the years. You're learning it from the people that actually wrote it, not from a third or fourth iteration from somebody else. And I think that's important to recognize, because one of the advantages of being an old guy in this business is that I'm still old enough to remember that I actually was the person that made up this stuff. And it's not something I got from somewhere else. And so I think it's good to hear it from the source.
Great. All right, we have a question from the chat box. Since I'm really getting a head start with the course this week, I'd like to know, when is the best time to use my coaching sessions? Do I need to be at a certain section of the course in order to schedule my first appointment?
My answer is no, you don't need to be at a certain point in the course. If you've got a coaching course, you will be asked to send in the first piece of writing, which is typically the writing workshop, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. Go ahead and send that in. The only thing that'll happen is that in the month of July, Megan and I typically will not be taking calls from students in the February exam. So we would ask you to write that, send it to us, but then just wait until after we get on the other side of the exam to do your coaching. Am I understanding that question correctly, Megan?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know if this is a February or a July student, but if this is a February student, what I would say is, I said earlier in the call, which they might not have been on yet, is please do it now so that you can get at least one call in, preferably more than one call before July. Oh, this is a July student, June said. Okay, great. So if you were a February student, get it in before so that you can get started on the right track. Since you're a July student, please ASAP. That test is 40 something days away. We want to get you going. Yeah. As soon as you come to a writing assignment, whatever the writing assignment is, send it in to the person who is working with you for sure. Yeah. And then they can talk to you more during your call about any questions you have on when and how often you should be meeting with them.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is if you're at all confused about this, send an email to June. She can look at where you are and get it to either Megan or me, and we'll get the right response for you.
Great. All right, next, this person is asking about secured transactions in Florida. That's a relatively newer subject. And they said, how long has the subject been on the exam? And since then, how often is it tested? Is this a subject I should spend a lot of time on?
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you how many years it's been. It's not really new anymore. It's just one of the last subjects that was added. It's been out there, I would say, a good 6 or 7 years, maybe longer, and it's tested frequently. And you should spend as much time as your lessons and units indicate. So if it says this is 3 hours to read, spend 3 hours. If it says a 3-hour lecture, spend the 3 hours. You should be doing the studying as you see it. Don't try to remake the wheel. The other thing I would say, and because we're starting to get into that window, aren't we, Megan, when people want to know what's going to be on the exam. In the first 10 days of July, I will do a series of videos, one for each jurisdiction, in which I look back at last exam, which was February of 2022. Crazy. And then I will look forward to the July exams with my trend lines. Some people call them previews or predictions. I'll call it a preview of what is potentially going to be on the exam. We hold those until about the 10th of July because we don't want you to overreact to them. But that's where we'll tell you, hey, we think this topic has been tested more often and is more likely. And I use a 1 to 5 rating scale. So we'll see where we put secured transactions in Florida on the 1 to 5 scale for July. But it is a frequently tested topic these days.
Great. All right. Another question from the chat box. If I'm a July taker, is it a good idea to switch to photo reading now? I've been doing well so far in the course and I don't think I need it, but I want to cover all my bases for this exam.
Yeah, I love photo reading. It makes a difference. People who photo read just do better, in my view, which isn't, and I always have to be careful about this. You don't have to be a photo reader to pass the bar. Plenty of people in our course don't photo read and they pass the bar. But the people who photo read get better scores by and large than the people who don't. So if you are looking to cover all your bases, you should photo read. Plus, it's a game changer. It's a life changer. Now, the question at this point, 45 days or so out, is do you have enough time? And the answer is yes. Unequivocally, you have enough time to photo read. And here's why. If you went through the entire photo reading course that you get through our partner, it's an hour a day for 8 days while you're studying for the bar. So you study your first hour of the day doing a photo reading lesson for an hour, and then you go on with your bar study. And after lesson 4 in the photo reading, you'll actually be photo reading in the bar as well. And it's very easy to integrate them. You can go very deep in photo reading. You can learn a lot of techniques, certainly. But you don't need very much to learn how to just turn the pages because it's really the non-conscious mind doing what it's going to do anyway. And so there's plenty of time to learn that. The other piece that I would say, and the reason I think you ought to do photo reading now, is that I think it makes mind mapping even more effective. And I know Megan is the big proponent of mind mapping. We have seen a huge correlation in successful students and mind mappers, right?
Yes. Oh, it's like such an amazing way to study. Highly recommend it.
And if you're a photo reader, I think the mind mapping is even more effective, though mind mapping works again for everybody, no matter how you read. But if you are photo reading now, you're going to find that creating mind maps just makes more sense, works better, gives you a deeper dive into the material in a way that you're just not going to get it otherwise. Again, it's this notion of the exam seems really close. I know it does, but there's plenty of time to learn how to do these things. In fact, I recommended to a student today that they add bar maps so that they can get their mind maps created really fast for them, and then look at the possibility of adding photo reading just to integrate all of those ideas together. And I think that's the preferred way to study.
Great. All right, let's turn now to the question that you asked on the community group this week, which is, I think a couple of days ago, what is the biggest study challenge that you're facing? And I think these were definitely responses that I've been hearing from students as we go. Let's just chat in a couple minutes about these. First is anxiety for essay writing. Jackson, what can people do if they're feeling anxious about the essays?
Yeah, a couple of obvious things. Get coaching. That's the number one way to resolve that. At the very least, do the personal writing workshop with Megan. Get the coaching calls with Megan. Get the coaching calls with me. There's just no way around that. Doing more essays is helpful, but it's most helpful when you know how to write them. And so you got to make sure you've got the basics there. So I think that's one of the ways that you deal with that particular anxiety. I would also say getting on a group coaching call and talking probably is helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that with the essays, it's like anything else in your life, which is it's scarier the more unknown it is. So the more you do it, it takes away a lot of the power that the fear could have over you because you do it over and over again and you're like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. And so it just doesn't feel as scary. So that's true with literally anything. When it becomes routine and rote, it just doesn't have the power over you anymore that it used to. And I think particularly when you're not only writing them, but you're writing them and sending them to someone to review and talk about, that takes away the fear over it because that's what you're doing on the bar. And you don't want the bar to be the first time that you send your essay to someone else to review. You don't want that to be the first time that you're stepping out without a safety net underneath you. Go ahead and do that with us because we're not going to be mean or bad or whatever, but also, we're not actually judging you or we hold no power over your life and your future as an attorney. And so we are a nice stepping stone to see, oh, okay, I can do this. I can do this. So that when you do it on the exam, it doesn't feel like this is the first time I've really done this with any stakes. Okay. All right. Next one is not slipping on my study schedule.
Yeah. So number one, get with Brianna, do the time management. That's 30 minutes that will change your life. But beyond that is don't overschedule. Schedule a week at a time. Don't try to schedule every day from now until the bar exam. Too much is going to happen. There are going to be too many things that change the flow. If you work in a 7-day pattern, you should stay fairly in control. And I would say that really you just have to make the appointment with yourself. You have to say, these are my bar study hours, and I'm going to use those hours, and I'm going to show up at the times that I've set. Short of that, I don't think there's any magic pill for this.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice to just do things one step at a time. So that 1 week study schedule, giving yourself grace, not expecting perfection from yourself. When you say slipping on your study schedule, give yourself a lot of grace. If you one day doesn't look the way that you thought it was going to, that's all right. Maybe it's okay. Maybe there was something else that you needed to spend that time on, and that's perfectly fine. Is there another place in your schedule that week that you could make it up? Maybe don't catastrophize small problems if that happens. I just know that's a common thing we see closer to the end, that it's, oh gosh, I got derailed for one afternoon. Now everything is horrible and off track. And take deep breaths, put it in perspective, and figure out how to get yourself moving again. Okay, that's what's important. All right. And speaking of getting yourself moving again, the last biggest study challenge is keeping up momentum, which is certainly a challenge with all the other stuff that's always happening around us all the time. It's really easy to get out of the habit, maybe, of putting in the study hours that we know we need to, or maybe something, an illness or just another event happens and we get knocked off track. How do we get ourselves back on and moving in the right direction?
Yeah, it's a common thing. It's one of the reasons we created Calming the Chaos to work with June, because it comes up all the time. And I'm not sure it's the highest and best use of my time or Megan's time in our coaching calls to work on those issues with you, but June is really expert at them. You get 4 coaching sessions with her. I think that would make a big difference. The only thing I can tell you is that when you get close enough to the exam, it's like the power of the Death Star. It starts to pull you in whether you like it or not. And so you do build momentum at that point. I think we're at a stage right now where momentum starts to build for most people. If you haven't gotten underway, it's starting now and you're going. What I see from most of the students I'm talking with is that they've got pretty good momentum going. They've been working, they're starting to feel the rhythm and the flow of the work that they're doing. But if you're really struggling with that, then there's probably a reason. There's probably some bigger block going on, and you probably want to address that with June in order to figure it out. And it may mean you're going to sit for the exam in 2023. It's not the worst thing that can happen, but you should just be intentional about it and know you're doing it and not just slide into it.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, we're going to transition now into our second half of our MBE tips. And Jackson will be on his own. I have to say goodbye to everyone for today. So I'm sad to miss this one. I'll look forward to watching the replay. So Jackson, if you want to show everyone the rest of the MBE tips.
Yeah, we're glad to do that. We started last week by looking at the first 5 of our 10 tips for the MBE. And again, what we wanted to do here was to update these tips. I first recorded these decades ago and then updated them the last time, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I've really thought a lot about what the real tips ought to be these days. And I had some different ideas than I had a few years ago. So we wanted to cover those with you today. So let me just remind you of what our 10 tips are, and then we'll dig into the 5 for this week. The first of our 10 tips to raise your score on the multi-state exam was to answer questions quickly. We talked about a 90-second time frame as being the sweet spot, and we want to encourage you to do that. Our second tip was that you should answer intuitively. Instead of trying to grind your way through every answer, what you want to be doing is using our selective intuition method of previewing an answer in your brain before you look at the answer choices and then going from there. And we talked last week about that in a little detail. And then we also mentioned our third tip, which was repetition, maybe repetition again. The idea of this course is that you learn through repetition, and doing repetition rather than cramming or memorizing for the multi-state, I think is one of the most significant pieces of how you improve your scores. In a course like ours, the repetition is built in. If you are listening or watching this later, I would tell you, if you're not in our course, you should be repeating the information rather than trying to memorize, cram, or do mnemonics or flashcards. Frankly, we see a much higher score when people learn through repetition. Then our fourth tip we've just been talking about today, and that is using mind maps. Mind maps are an extraordinarily effective way to organize material in a visual way so that you can literally find that material in your brain when you're on the bar exam and on the multi-state. It helps show you the relationship between different ideas and different concepts, and we really encourage the use of mind maps for the MBE. And then we finished up last week with my favorite, which is you should be a photo reader. There's no doubt in my mind that photo reading makes a big difference on the multi-state. Exam after exam, when I interview successful bar takers, they are photo readers. They are people who had failed the exam previously. They added photo reading, they mind map, they used those first 3 or 4 tips, and their scores went up. And their scores go up dramatically. And they go up by, in some cases, by so much that it's almost unbelievable. But there you have it. Photo reading really works. And if you're not a photo reader, you should definitely check it out and add it. And it will make a difference for you because it will allow you to retain material in a much different way. You're really processing it in the non-conscious mind and then using it in that second tip of intuitive answering to get better results. Today, we're going to focus on these following remainder of our list of tips. And I'm just going to preview them and then we'll dive into them. Tip number 6 is going to be don't overanalyze. We're going to talk about the importance of not overthinking a bar question. Number 7 is don't memorize. We can see that lines up with repetition, and that is going to be the antithesis of repetition. And then tip number 8 is really a reminder that it's okay to miss a question, and that's something that bar takers tend to lose sight of. We're going to talk about that. And then number 9 is you got to learn from your mistakes. As you study for the bar, you have to be aware that learning from your mistakes is one of the most valuable things that you can be doing in order to improve your ultimate performance. And number 10, really wrapping all of this up, is to identify that really the way you study for the multi-state is based on process and not outcome. And this is one area where I find people consistently miss the mark. They're too focused on their outcome and not focused enough on their process. So those are our 10 tips, and we're going to now dive in and look at each one. We'll go through those are the 5 we looked at last week. So here we are on tip number 6, which we said was don't overanalyze. Now, what we mean by this is that when you try to analyze a question, you actually reduce your chances of selecting the correct answer. When we talked about answering quickly, we said 90 seconds is the sweet spot to answer an MBE question. The problem, however, is that you would think that if I spend more time and I think about the problem in more depth, if I do more work on it, I should get better at it. And so when we graph the data points, what we would expect to see is a curve that starts at the bottom at 0 seconds. And then as time goes out over the timeline, we should get higher and higher. That's not what we see. What we've got is a flat line in terms of success until about 80 or 85 seconds. Then it spikes straight up and it stays there from 85 seconds to about 95 or 100 seconds. And then, and this is the important part, at about 100 seconds, it doesn't continue to go up. It actually drops almost down under 25%. In other words, you'd have a better chance after 100 seconds to just have a predetermined answer choice, A, B, C, or D, and you just mark it at that. The reason for this is that the bar examiners have written a test in which they have already thought through that over-analysis piece. They have created so many fine line distinctions that if you try to over-analyze the question, you'll find yourself second guessing, you'll find yourself changing answers, you'll find yourself really struggling. And in the process of doing that, you're not going to get a better response. You're not going to do better on the question. Plus, there's a huge penalty to be paid. And the penalty is that the time you spend working on that question is clearly going to take away the time you've got elsewhere. And as a result, you're really putting yourself in a double bind. You don't get the question and you hurt yourself further on in the test. I know that it's tempting that we all want to get the questions. We're going to come to the tip about it's okay to miss questions. But I think it's important to understand that this idea of I'll just work harder and I'll analyze the question more is really counterproductive. Now, I do want to give one caveat to this. As you're doing questions in practice, I think it's fine. You take your shot if you got it right or wrong. Don't overanalyze it there. But when you get to the answer explanations, that's the time to do the deep analysis, to add those explanations to your mind map. Remember our tip number 4, or to really look at the explanation and make sure that you understand why that problem is occurring. That's the time to do the analysis, but it is not in the answering of the question. So that's tip number 6. Let's keep going. Tip number 7. Oh man, this one makes me nuts. Tip number 7 says, don't memorize. And I can say it. I've been saying it for over 30 years. I don't know how else to say it. And consistently, when I'm talking to students who are new to the course or who have taken and failed the exam, they tell me that the biggest problem they had was I wasn't able to memorize enough. No kidding. There is no ability to memorize all the material that's testable on the bar exam. It's just not possible. And I don't think that's true just for those of us that are older, but it is absolutely true that as you get older, your ability to memorize is going to decline. We have plenty of clinical studies that show our ability to memorize is remarkably limited. Now, if you're using your non-conscious brain material from a deep place, you will have access to a ton of information and you can use it effectively. But if you spend hundreds of hours trying to memorize, which is really just another word for cramming, the problem is that it is not only a time waste for you, it has very little benefit on the exam. Because here's what's happened. You get into the exam, you've tried to memorize, and now you find, oh my gosh, I'm under pressure. I can't remember everything. You start to press harder, which means that you find it more difficult to get that information out. And it causes you to then freeze up. Now, I've talked about some of the clinical work that's been done on brain learning. And one of the most interesting studies was one that was done with a functional MRI and the question of memorization. The subjects were given a block of material, a set of words, and they were asked to memorize the words, and then they put them in the functional MRI, and they asked them to recite the words back. What the researchers discovered was that when the person had tried to memorize the list and then went into the MRI, that their brain, as they tried to remember this, lights up like a Christmas tree. What's happening is the brain is actually pulling a tremendous amount of oxygen into the prefrontal cortex in order to keep the brain synapses working and the information flowing. But the net effect of that was that when they then asked the suspects later what they felt like, many of them described a sleep experience. They said, I felt like I was sleeping with my eyes open. And in fact, we hear this anecdotally from bar applicants all the time. They'll say, I was sitting in the exam doing the MBE and suddenly 15 minutes had gone by and I don't know what happened. I was still on the same question. Why did that happen? Well, what happens is that when you're trying to pull all that information from memory, you're literally depriving the brain of the oxygen that it needs, and it causes you to go into a waking sleep. So as a result, it not only doesn't help your scoring, it actually has a negative impact. And that's why I use this picture. That person's sleeping? Yeah, I think so. That's what's happening when you're trying to memorize. So you have to be willing to move counter to the grain of what the big box bar reviews tell you when they say memorize and recite. Memorization is A, not possible, B, not productive, and C, doesn't work on the exam, and D, it actually hurts you. There is no reason to memorize. The problem is most people are scared to death to give up that old trope of I'm going to memorize and learn everything. But let me tell you, if you got your bar review books from us the other day, you saw it was a pretty good sized box. There are usually 15, 16, 17 books there. Go ahead, I dare you, memorize all of them. You just can't. It's a crazy thing to be doing, and it doesn't help you on the MBE. So hope that makes sense. I'm being pretty dogmatic about it, but I think it's one of the most important mistakes to avoid when you're trying to improve your MBE score. All right, number 8, we'll lighten up here a little bit. It's okay to miss a question. I think one of the things that's really troubling to me is that students get into this mindset of I've got to get them all right, or I've got to really spend time on these tough questions as though you get quality points or style points for the tougher questions. In case anybody doesn't know it, every question on the bar exam is worth exactly the same amount. You don't get any extra credit for a tough question that you got right. By the same token, it's okay to guess because you don't get penalized for a wrong answer. So it's not like the LSAT or some other tests that are out there. Now, there's 200 questions on the bar exam, 175 actually count. We don't know which 25 in any exam are evaluation questions. You won't know it either. But when we take a look at the overall numbers, the reality is that you can miss 70 out of those 200 questions. You can get 130 raw questions correct, and you'll pass the MBE in every jurisdiction. In some jurisdictions where you only need a scaled 130, that equates to probably something on the order of 115 to 118 raw questions correct, which means that you can miss 82 or 83 questions and still pass. I think that when you start feeling like you have to get all the questions, you put an enormous amount of pressure on yourself, and that's a problem. So when you're in the exam, if you hit a really hard question, for me, that would be a rule against perpetuities question. I'm very likely in that situation to just look at it, see if I've got a selective intuition answer, mark that answer, whatever it is, and then just go on. And I don't even spend 90 seconds on it because I know that it's not a question I'm likely to get. And I can afford to miss some of them. I think that this idea of missing questions, being okay with missing questions, is actually pretty freeing to people because it gives you this opportunity now to really focus in on getting the questions right that you can get correct. If you hit a really crazy long fact pattern and it just looks like a mess to you, it's a cluster, go ahead and just mark your answer choice of the day. And I'm a firm believer in having the answer choice of the day. Before you walk in, say, my answer is going to be A or B or C or D whenever I don't know, and just be consistent with marking that answer. That gives you as much of a chance to get the answer right as anything else, as long as you're consistent. And remember, you can still miss a lot of questions and pass the bar. All right, tip number 9, you got to learn from your mistakes. I think one of the things that I see, and Megan sees a lot with students as they're preparing for the bar, is that they actually get too locked in on trying to be right on everything they do. When they're taking MBE questions, they worry because they're not getting enough questions correct. I had a student say to me the other day, I think I'm locked up in doing MBEs because I want to get them all right, and I don't feel like I'm ready to take that group of 25 or 30 questions. I think that's the wrong approach to take here. Instead, what I'd like you to do is to learn from your mistakes. Treat your practice as an opportunity to learn. As you do each question in practice, if you get it right, terrific. Find out why you got it right. And if it was for the right reason, you don't have to worry about it. If you got it right for the wrong reason, then add that note to your mind maps or to your notes so that you understand what's going on. If you miss the question, no problem. take the answer explanation, look at that, and again, add it to your mind map or your notes so that you can identify what's going on in that particular problem. It's the difference that we see between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, then anytime you miss a question, even in practice, it's somehow a diminishment of your skills or your ability or your worth. And that's the wrong approach to take. If you have a growth mindset, when you make a mistake, you say, great, now I'm going to get a chance to learn something I didn't know before, or I wasn't aware was going to be a problem for me. And that allows you then to focus on specific weak spots. The structure and pedagogy of our course is built on the idea that you read, you go through the lectures, and then you do question practice, and then you come back and you do more question practice later, and you keep returning to it. But as you're doing that question practice, it's there to help you understand what you're missing so that you learn from doing that. Too often I hear from students that say, I'm doing 10 multi-state questions a night, or 25 or 50 or whatever their number is. And I say, what did you learn from it? I just wanted to do it to see how I was doing. Yeah, that's not really the point. You should be doing those questions in order to learn from the mistakes you make. When I'm taking a quiz or I'm answering questions, I'm excited to miss questions in practice because it gives me the opportunity to learn. This is also a really good time to practice selective intuition. What's the downside? You try something using selective intuition in practice and you get it wrong. Who cares? It doesn't change anything in the ultimate outcome. So you have to have this growth mindset to learn from your mistakes. And then our last of the 10 tips I describe as process, not outcome. As we enter into the window of getting closer to the exam, this becomes even more pronounced. Students become really fixated on what their scores are. What's the outcome? How many questions did I get, whether it's out of 30 or 100 or 200? What is my score? The reality is that this process of learning is not based on the outcome. It's based on the steps that you take. And the study process, if you are focused on, did I do the reading? Did I do the lectures? Did I do the question practice? That's how you get the results that you want. If you're focused entirely on outcome, it's going to cause you to either have that fixed mindset that I just spoke about, or it's going to cause you to freeze up, and it's going to then make you think, I can't do it. I'm not good at this. Is there ever a time when outcome matters? I would say typically in the last couple of weeks before the bar exam, that's where you want to be doing full-length mixed topic practice and seeing what your results are. And if you're in our course, we'll give you benchmarks for the different tests that you take. But even then, you're still using those tests to help you learn right up until the end of your study. And so the more you can focus on process and the less you focus on outcome, the greater the improvement will be and the better the outcome will be. If you are worried about the results right now, whenever you're listening to this, you're really missing the mark. Worrying about results before the actual bar exam is not very productive. Be concerned, be focused, be intentional about process, and I think you're going to get a much better result. So I hope that helps everybody. And those are our 10 tips. Let me jump back in here. There we go, I'm back. We will place those 10 tips for you in our course package. The actual first part that we did last week is already there, so it'll be a 2-part series, and you'll be able to have a chance to look at that.
We have a question in the chat box. Is it 90 seconds even when we are just starting the subject, or are we talking 90 seconds after we become more familiar with the subject?
That's a great question. It's 90 seconds right from the beginning. I always want you at 90 seconds. And a great way to do this, and this tip came from Amanda, one of our group coaches. She took an egg timer, one of those sand timers that's 90 seconds. That's how long it takes to cook an egg. And she just used that and flipped it every time, right from the beginning, 90 seconds for every question. Again, when we think about process, not outcome, I don't care if you're missing all the questions. Sometimes people say, how many questions should I be getting right out of 30? I don't care. You can get 1 right, get 0 right. The point is to learn from them. So the 90 seconds helps build that muscle memory of how long to work. So that's the idea there. Next week, what Megan and I are going to be doing is another deep dive into a subject. She hasn't told me what the subject is yet, so I can't even tell you, but we will be doing a mind map and some MBE questions to look at that. I hope everybody has a good study week. I hope you stay focused and you're staying well and healthy. Glad to have all of you with us. And don't forget to sign up for boot camp if you're a 2023 bar taker. And make sure you sign up for the coaching and the upgrades that we have available if you're a July bar taker. And then we will see you all again next week here, next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thanks everybody for being here. With that, we'll say goodbye.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.